Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the not for EU labels on foods that started to be noticed across the UK, as I suggested it would, not necessarily for the right reasons, causing no small measure of misunderstanding, in fact. Problem for the Tories is that the misunderstandings are making Brexit seem even worse, and it's entirely the fault of the government for not explaining it to the public. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, as of the start of this month, the red and green lanes were set up between Britain and Northern Ireland, basically because we left the single market customs union, particularly in this case the single market, with the intention of diverging our standards with the EU. And because there must not be any physical border infrastructure within the island of Ireland, Boris Johnson agreed to a trade border inside the UK between Britain and Northern Ireland. This meant that any goods being exported from Britain to Northern Ireland would have to face import controls just the same as if they were passing directly into the EU, which means the more we diverge, the more annoying those checks have to be. And this is because there can be no further controls preventing those goods passing into the Republic of Ireland and therefore the single market. But, complained the Brexiteers, who agreed to all this, there's no need for these controls if the goods are being sold in shops in Northern Ireland. If they're not going to be sold into the single market, why do we need all this faff? But how do you know they're only going to be sold in Northern Ireland? So after years of petulance from Boris Johnson and David Frost, Rishi Sunak finally agreed the only realistic solution: red and green lanes, goods that are to be sold only in Northern Ireland and can be verified as such, have labelling make it clear they are not for sale in the EU, can pass from Britain to Northern Ireland via the green lane, where the checks are drastically lessened to make trade quicker and easier. But people have noticed these labels in British stores as well and are jumping to an obvious, although incorrect, conclusion. I'm seeing a number of Twitter posts, for example, from people who are assuming that the foods have this label because they do not meet the EU standards. Now, the assumption is that this is potentially less safe or of lower quality. Now, it's not actually true, or rather it's not necessarily true. This labelling is purely to allow for lower hassle export to Northern Ireland. So why do we need these labels on products for Britain? Well, technically we don't. It's about cost. If you make a particular product, like a ready meal in this case, and you'll be selling some of it in Britain and some of it in Northern Ireland, it's the same product, you're perfectly free to create two production lines, one with the not for EU labelling for sale in Northern Ireland and one, without that for sale in Britain. But that is more expensive, less efficient. Much more cost effective to use the same labelling for both markets. This is why we have the not for EU labels on a lot of food products in Britain now. It's simply lines which are also produced for the Northern Ireland market, and where the producer can't be asked with the extra hassle involved in going through the red lane, which you'd only want to do if you're actually exporting to the Republic of Ireland. Actually, even then you wouldn't want to do it, but there's no choice since we left the single market, is there? But although this label is not a sign that the food is of lower quality, you can see why people would think that. It's not a stupid conclusion to jump to. It's actually the obvious conclusion. I mean, everyone knows that the EU have high standards. Despite what the Tories claimed, everyone also knows that we have been moving to lower ours. And the government made absolutely no attempt to push a public information campaign to explain what the new labelling actually means. Possibly because even if it were to be explained to people, still doesn't paint Brexit in a positive light. It's still an example of creating trade friction. And for what? The government obviously decided it was better to hope that most people just didn't notice the label, or maybe they even imagined that Leave supporters think the label is somehow positive. That not for EU means, oh, the EU aren't allowed, it's ours, rather than the EU will not permit its sale. I mean, I don't know what their thinking behind the lack of public messaging was. Perhaps there was no thinking. Perhaps they didn't even ask the question as to whether they should explain to people or not. I don't know. What I do know is that I am not in the least bit surprised that people would associate these labels with lower quality. I said as much at the time that this is what would happen, because it is, after all, a perfectly natural conclusion to draw. It's also a conclusion that will make people think think of Brexit even more negatively. As such, although I'm happy to point out what it really means, it's not the worst news in the world if my message doesn't actually reach enough people to dispel the misconception. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.